July 25th, 2000. Charles de Gaulle Airport, Paris. At 1442 UTC, the most extraordinary passenger aircraft ever built begins its takeoff roll. Concorde. Twice the speed of sound. 109 people on board. 77 seconds later, she is on fire. Less than 2 minutes after takeoff begins, she is gone. The weather was clear. The aircraft had spent nearly 25 years in passenger service without a single fatal accident. And the crew had only seconds to understand what was happening. But the chain that destroyed Flight 4590 had already begun, before the Concorde even started moving. And at the center of that chain was something so small that no one on board could possibly have known it was there. A piece of metal, just 435 millimeters long.
Concorde was unlike anything else in commercial aviation. Born from an extraordinary British-French engineering partnership, it entered passenger service in 1976. For the next 27 years, it represented something aviation has never truly replaced: speed, altitude, and the belief that the future of air travel would be faster than the present. Concorde flew at Mach 2, more than twice the speed of sound. At nearly 60,000 feet, its passengers flew higher than those aboard conventional airliners. A journey across the Atlantic that could take a normal passenger jet 7 hours could take Concorde around 3.5. Only 20 Concordes were ever built, and despite the extraordinary speeds and stresses involved, the aircraft entered the summer of 2000 without a single fatal accident. Air France Flight 4590 was not a normal scheduled service. It was a charter flight from Paris to New York. On board were 100 passengers, most of them German tourists traveling to New York, where they planned to board a cruise ship. 9 crew members were also on board. In command was Captain Christian Marty, an experienced Concorde pilot. The aircraft was FBTSC. It had been flying since the 1970s. And on the afternoon of July 25th, 2000, it began taxiing toward runway 26 right. But Flight 4590 was not the first aircraft to use that runway that afternoon, and something had been left behind. Minutes before the Concorde began its takeoff roll, a Continental Airlines DC-10 accelerated down the same runway. During its departure, a narrow metal wear strip separated from the aircraft. It fell onto runway 26 right. No one noticed. The strip was approximately 435 millimeters long. It had come from the thrust reverser assembly of the DC-10's number 3 engine, and it should not have been made the way it was. The replacement strip was made from titanium alloy rather than the material specified by the manufacturer. Its installation had not followed the approved specifications. Now, it was lying on the runway, waiting. Charles de Gaulle had procedures for inspecting its runways for foreign object debris, but that afternoon, the strip was not found before Flight 4590 began its departure. At 1442 UTC, the Concorde lined up on runway 26 right. The engines accelerated. The aircraft began to move. Faster and faster. Investigators would later examine several irregularities surrounding the departure. The aircraft was above its maximum structural takeoff weight. It was departing with a tailwind, and a spacer was missing from the left main landing gear following maintenance. But the investigation did not identify the missing spacer as a cause of the accident. The event that triggered the catastrophe was still ahead of the aircraft, and by the time the crew reached it, the Concorde was moving at nearly 300 kilometers per hour. The left main landing gear passed directly over the metal strip. Tire number 2 struck it and exploded. A tire failure at takeoff speed is already a serious event. On Concorde, the consequences were catastrophic. A large fragment of the destroyed tire was thrown upward at tremendous speed. It struck the underside of the left wing, directly beneath one of the aircraft's fuel tanks. The tire fragment did not simply punch a hole through the tank. The force of the impact sent a pressure shock through the fuel inside it. The tank ruptured. Fuel began pouring from the left wing. Within seconds, it ignited. People watching from the airport saw flames trailing behind the Concorde while it was still on the runway. The control tower warned the crew, but by then, the aircraft was beyond the point at which the takeoff could safely be abandoned. The Concorde had passed V1, the decision speed. Ahead was the end of the runway. Behind them was the point at which stopping had still been possible. Captain Marty continued the takeoff. The Concorde left the ground, with fire streaming from its left side. But the crew's problems were only beginning. The damaged landing gear could not retract normally. The fire was affecting the two engines on the left side of the aircraft. Thrust was deteriorating. The Concorde could not accelerate normally. It could not climb. The crew attempted to keep the aircraft in the air, but with power disappearing on the left side, the aircraft began to roll. Its speed was falling. Its altitude was barely increasing. There was nowhere to go. The crew attempted to reach nearby Le Bourget Airport. They never made it. Less than 2 minutes after the takeoff began, Air France Flight 4590 crashed into a hotel in Gonesse, approximately 6 kilometers from Charles de Gaulle Airport. All 109 people on board were killed. 4 people inside the hotel also died. 113 people. In less than 2 minutes. But the investigation would soon reveal that this catastrophe had not begun with the fire. It had begun much earlier.
France's Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, the BEA, began the investigation. The physical evidence pointed investigators back toward runway 26 right. There, they found the remains of the Concorde's tire. They found evidence of the fuel leak, and they identified the narrow metal strip that had been lying in the aircraft's path. The chain became clear. The Concorde's tire struck the strip. The tire was destroyed. A high-energy fragment struck the wing. The impact caused a fuel tank to rupture. Fuel escaped.
The fuel ignited, and the resulting fire and loss of thrust left the aircraft unable to climb away safely. But finding the strip was not the end of the investigation. It was the beginning of another question. Why was it there? Investigators traced the strip back to the Continental Airlines DC-10 that had departed shortly before the Concorde. The part had been installed as part of maintenance on the aircraft's thrust reverser. But the replacement did not conform to the approved specification. A component only a few centimeters wide had separated from one aircraft and remained on the runway long enough to destroy another. The investigation also examined Concorde itself. Tire failures were not unknown to the aircraft. Over the years, the Concorde fleet had experienced numerous tire-related incidents. The accident demonstrated just how dangerous high-energy tire debris could become when it struck the aircraft's wing and fuel system. Investigators also examined the aircraft's weight, the tailwind, the missing landing gear spacer, the runway inspection procedures, and the actions of the crew. But the BEA did not identify the missing spacer as a cause of the accident, and it found no evidence that the crew had caused the catastrophe. By the time the pilots understood the scale of the emergency, they were already beyond the point where they could safely stop. They had been given a situation with almost no margin for recovery. The technical investigation ended. The legal battle did not. Years later, Continental Airlines and several individuals faced criminal proceedings in France. In 2010, Continental Airlines and mechanic John Taylor were convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Continental was fined, Taylor received a suspended sentence. The court found that the improperly manufactured and installed metal strip had played a central role in the accident. But the case did not end there. In 2012, a French appeals court overturned the criminal convictions. The maintenance failures surrounding the strip were not erased, but the court found that the legal threshold for criminal responsibility had not been met. 12 years after the crash, the criminal convictions did not stand. But while the courts debated responsibility, Concorde itself had already been changed forever. Immediately after the accident, Concorde operations were suspended. For the first time in its history, the aircraft's safety record had been broken. And before it could carry passengers again, changes were required. The fuel tanks were fitted with Kevlar-based protective liners designed to reduce the consequences of high-energy impacts. New Michelin tires were introduced, designed to be more resistant to catastrophic fragmentation. Protection around vulnerable electrical systems was improved. The objective was simple: prevent another tire failure from creating the same chain of events. More than a year after the crash, Concorde returned to passenger service. On November 7, 2001, the aircraft once again crossed the Atlantic with paying passengers. For a moment, the era appeared to have survived. But the world around Concorde had changed. The September 11th attacks had devastated international air travel. Premium transatlantic demand had fallen. And Concorde had always been extraordinarily expensive to operate. Its future was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. In April 2003, Air France and British Airways announced that Concorde would be retired. Air France ended its Concorde operations in 2003. And on October 24th of that year, the last scheduled commercial Concorde flight landed at London Heathrow. The passengers stepped off. The engines shut down. And an era that had begun in 1976 was over. The Concorde did not crash because of one enormous failure. A part was manufactured incorrectly. It separated from another aircraft. It remained on a runway. A tire struck it at nearly 300 kilometers per hour. And in seconds, a chain that no one on board could see became impossible to stop. 113 people died. Concorde would fly again. Its fuel tanks were reinforced. New tires were developed. The aircraft returned to the Atlantic. But something had changed. 3 years later, Concorde left passenger service forever. For 27 years, it had carried passengers faster than the rotation of the Earth beneath them. It flew higher than any other passenger airliner. It crossed the Atlantic in a time no passenger aircraft has matched since. And the chain that changed its history began with a piece of metal just 435 millimeters long. But the story of Flight 4590 is not only the story of an aircraft. 113 people died on July 25, 2000. They are the human cost of that chain. They are the reason the investigation mattered, and the reason its lessons still matter. Aviation learns from failure. It always has. But some lessons change more than a procedure. Some change an era. This was Critical Failure. Subscribe for the next investigation.